A major shakeup at the FBI to tell you about. The president has just tapped Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey to be the Bureau's co-deputy director, alongside former right-wing podcast host Dan Bongino, who was appointed back in February. The New York Times writes that Bailey's appointment bewildered many current and former FBI agents who said they never had heard of a co-deputy director. Joining me here, Christopher O'Leary, former FBI counterterrorism official and MSNBC national security and intelligence analyst. You were at the Bureau for many years. Did you ever hear of a co-deputy director, and what's your reaction?
So it's not a thing. I've never heard of one because it's never existed. In the history of the FBI, that position has always been reserved for a senior special agent. And the reason being, that individual, he or she, it's always been a he, but certainly could become a she, and there was expectations it was going to be, is a senior tactical, operational, investigative advisor to the director. So compare it to a senior...
Long experience within the FBI, bottom line.
Great comparison is a sergeant major in the Marine Corps or Army or a master chief in the Navy. You're a senior enlisted advisor to the commander. With Dan Bongino, he didn't possess that background. In fairness to him, he had some operational experience, brief time in the NYPD, and then as a Secret Service agent. But that time was limited to protective security for dignitaries and not really what the FBI does. So his suitability was in question. And now bringing the Attorney General in from Missouri certainly begs the question, what qualifications does he have?
Well, he has no FBI experience. Obviously, neither did Bongino, as you just pointed out, which means the FBI now has two deputy directors with no prior experience within the agency. I think a lot of people probably don't know what a deputy director does. So what do they do, and what is the impact of that? I'm curious what your conversations have been like with folks who are still on the inside.
Yeah, I think you captured it. People are bewildered within the FBI and former agents who've been out for a while or who just fired last week, say. There's been quite a few that have been forced to depart. He lacks the investigative background and the operational experience. He also has very limited leadership experience. Now, he did lead soldiers in Iraq on 2 tours, and that should be noted. But he hasn't led large organizations, so it will be a challenge. What you would want is somebody in that position who would be complementary to the director, because Kash Patel lacks any of the experience needed to be director. So having a strong deputy director would have been the right thing to do to balance off his deficiencies. There were plenty of candidates within the FBI which would have been ideal for that. Some were moving up the ranks. None were partisan. So they certainly could have balanced things out and created some legitimacy within the FBI and outside. They chose not to do that. And the concern is that they've appointed a hyper-partisan crony that is going to drive the FBI into the wrong direction.
Can we talk about the long-term impact of this? Because I'm wondering, obviously, if you've been working at the FBI your entire professional life, if this is something you have dedicated yourself to, and you're someone with a level of ambition who believes that they are should be in line, at least under consideration for a higher job. What does this do to all those folks who want to spend their careers at the FBI?
Well, I think there's 2 things. I think for those who would want to work hard to try to promote and get in a leadership position, your head's going to be on the chopping block if you do that right now. And the last 6 months has shown us that.
Joining us now, Summer 4 White House correspondent Shelby Talcott. Shelby, what's up with Bongino?
I think that's the question everybody is asking right now, right? Because it is an unusual arrangement to have a co-deputy director of the FBI. And of course, this comes after there was some drama with Dan Bongino being frustrated over how the Epstein files were handled over the past few months. And so the open question that I've been hearing is Dan Bongino going to stay long-term? I've heard some people suggest that this isn't an arrangement he's going to be interested in. Of course, he was a successful podcaster before joining the FBI. So will he return to that? Will he stay at the FBI? Nobody really knows as of now, but this is certainly an arrangement that seems to be unique at the FBI right now.
Tell me a little bit more about Andrew Bailey and what are his goals?
Well, what's interesting is Andrew Bailey was actually on Donald Trump's mind during the transition team. He was originally floated as a possible contender for the attorney general spot. And so he has been a close Trump ally over the past few years. In Missouri, he sued Starbucks over its DEI policies. He's done a lot in Missouri that sort of aligns with the Trump administration policies. And so he is a more obvious choice as FBI to work for the FBI, just given his background. When you compare it with Bongino, I know when Bongino was originally tapped, some people were surprised because he doesn't necessarily have the same sort of background and expertise, which is why Donald Trump had originally picked him, because of course Donald Trump doesn't always like sort of the career folks. But this does seem to be a pick that aligns with Donald Trump's policies when you look at what Andrew Bailey has been doing in Missouri over the past few years.
Is there any surprise that Dan Bongino just hasn't been dismissed? Why he's still there, given the fighting with the attorney general? Or perhaps is there concern that if you let Dan Bongino go and get back into the podcasting world, that he's a liability?
Well, I think the big thing with this administration, and we've seen it, is there's a real reluctance to get rid of people, right? This administration is much more aligned internally, even with those internal fights, than Trump 1.0. I've talked to a number of administration officials and people who worked in the first Trump administration who have said, you know, we don't want to repeat the mistakes of the first administration, which was sort of a revolving door at times and caused a lot of external unnecessary drama as they look back on it. I think the other thing is, despite the frustrations over the Epstein files and that drama that played out very publicly, a lot of people like Dan Bongino, and he is very well liked by the conservative movement. And so that matters as well. This is not a case where you have a number of people sort of wanting Dan Bongino to get pushed out, and that matters to Donald Trump and to his top aides.
It's interesting because in the past, when Donald Trump has dismissed people, even if they were popular, he was able to take down their popularity. If they were gone, they were no longer in his orbit, he could just dismiss them and say, I never liked them, and that person was suddenly persona non grata. But this new crop of people that Donald Trump has around him have created whole personalities, whole brands based on MAGA and their alignment with Trump, in some cases becoming extremely popular, like Dan Bongino. Donald Trump doesn't have the same ability to, or does he not have the same ability to dismiss people and diminish them as he maybe once had?
To focus on our families, our jobs, and our communities, and move the country forward as opposed to wallowing in the funk of Donald Trump's brain.
I think there are a lot of Americans across the country who are upset with this administration because they've seen him break campaign promise after campaign promise. He said he would lower grocery prices. He said he would protect Medicaid. Yeah. He said he would release the Epstein files. He said he would end the war in Ukraine on day one. I could keep going. And you see that the Republicans, specifically Donald Trump, are already trying to cheat in the 2026 elections with what they're doing in Texas.
That's it.
Exactly, right, because you shouldn't have to redraw the maps if you knew that you were going to do well in the midterms. And so it shows me that they know that they're worried about heading into the midterms because Americans are not happy with what they've seen from this administration, majority of the policies, I would say. I think there are some things that some voters are happy with that he's done, maybe in terms of immigration, for example. They think, okay, well, that's why I voted for him. But I think that some of those voters also think that he's gone a step too far when it comes to something like immigration. And so I think that you're going to see in the midterms these voters come out and push back because they're not seeing from the elite across this country people pushing back. I think Kamala Harris put it really well when she was interviewed on Stephen Colbert's show a few weeks back, where she said, none of this has surprised me. I guessed all this would happen, but it's the capitulation that's been surprising because we've seen corporation, tech moguls, universities, law firms, they've all caved to him. And so to your point that he is going to just try to see how much he can get away with until he stopped. And so it's going to take we, the people, the voters, to stop him.
And are we, the people, ready to show up?
That's the question, right? Because the other thing is, someone has to convince we, the people, that things need to change.
Right.
Because they can feel it themselves, but at the same time, you have to get people to go out and vote. When you think of the midterms, the kind of folks that get out, they're already kind of rabid and excited. You need the other folks who aren't rabid and excited. But I want to also get back, Brendan, back to the kind of selective justice that Trump has. This is from the New York Times. The headlines, Trump's selective stance on justice, redemption for some, scorn for others. Mr. Trump himself, a felon, they like to point that out, has shown particular leniency to criminals he seems to identify with, people who are white or wealthy or who he believes have been unfairly persecuted or who rioted in his name on January 6th. Also in the article, this quote from him, they will never be an asset to society, he said. I don't care. I know we all want to say, oh, they're going to be rehabbed. They're not going to be rehabbed. That was when he was holding up 5 mugshots of all people of color. What's the difference there? What do you read from that?
This is a president who got his political start by trying to undermine the legitimacy of the first black president. The racism of this man and this candidate is baked into everything that he does. One of the things that's saddest for me, hearing that quote and comparing it to what happened on January 6th and the subsequent pardons, is with January 6th, you had an overwhelmingly white riot against a perhaps majority or near majority minority police force. And I talked to a lot of officers, and one of them said something that has stuck with me for several years now. He said, look, I have worked a lot of riots in my career, but this is the first riot that I worked where the rioters thought that they were right. They thought that they were the ones that were in charge. And what scares me is when you see the president using such racist or racialized language like this, it risks legitimizing.
The FBI under Trump is falling apart. It is absolutely a mess, right? Like, obviously, you were like, Donald Trump, right from the beginning, we knew that he was like, well, I'm going to fire the FBI director, which is something you don't normally do, right? Like, the president technically has the right to fire an FBI director, but the reason the FBI director has like a 10-year appointment or whatnot is that it's supposed to be appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate, like a cabinet appointment, but it's not supposed to be replaced just because a new president comes in, which a traditional cabinet appointment often is. Like, when you become a new president, they often pick a new labor secretary, a new agriculture secretary, etc. But they don't fire the directors generally of the CIA or FBI and things like that, because they're supposed to be at least semi-independent from the White House. So right off the bat, we knew the FBI was going to be a mess. But then he was like, oh, Trump's going to put all of his cronies in charge. And he did. He picked people like Kash Patel and Dan Bongino to basically be his the number 1 and number 2 of the organization, despite probably not having like enough experience. Some of them, like Bongino does have Secret Service experience. He has some law enforcement experience, but he, maybe not that much, right? But it's like, okay, so it's going to be a mess. They're going to be loyal to him though. But now it looks like you have agents who have quit. You have agents who have been forced out. You have Dan Bongino sort of disappearing. And some people suggest that there's still a falling out because Bongino was a real big believer in all the dirt around Epstein, and then he came into the position and then seemingly fell in line behind the new nothing to see here folks, but behind the scenes never liked doing that, and there's conflict apparently between Bongino and Pam Bondi and all of this. This mess is worse than we thought. A lot of people at the FBI are mad because Donald is making them work like beat cops in D.C., wasting their time as they work very important cases on very serious financial and other crimes. Donald can't even run the police right. Like, often Republicans have been terrible, but they usually have loyalty from the police. Donald can't even get that because while there are cops that support his fascist agenda, there are some. He can't even run his department competently enough to keep him happy.